Hello, everyone. So I'm going to say welcome, and please, if you don't mind, please, most of you have already muted yourself, but please mute yourself while, unless there's a comment that is requested of you. But anyway, we're delighted. I'm Rita Riker, president of Focus Greater Syracuse, and delighted to see so many of you here today. Today, we're going to be talking and sharing insights from members of the Community Engagement Committee. So welcome, Melanie Littlejohn, Tim Penix, and Dan Kolinski. The committee's been focused on identifying priorities for Central New York, which ensure that Micron's investment in our region will benefit everyone. Melanie will be acting as our moderator today and will introduce Tim and Daniel. As I'm sure most of you know, Melanie is the president of the Central New York Community Foundation. Having retired from a long tenured, I decided not to say how many years, career with National Grid. She has a lengthy, impressive resume, which you can read on our website, focussyracuse.org, together with Tim's and Daniel's. So Melanie, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good. Thank you, Rita. And a bigger thank you for not saying how long of a career I had at National Grid. But no, welcome. And thank you for inviting us to kind of talk some about this whole notion of the community priorities document. And we're probably, and stop us when we do this, we're going to wind up speaking in acronyms, right? We're going to say CPD, that's the Community Priorities Document. That the CEC, the Community Engagement Committee, listened and gathered data from close to 13,000 people, but we'll talk about that in a second, to then help frame out what are the priorities that would be funded through the CIF, the Community Engagement Fund. The Community Engagement Fund. So thank you. And it's a huge pleasure to be here with two of my colleagues, Tim Penix, who is, my side-by-side, co-chair, and we had a tremendous time for the last year, a little over a year, actually, working with some fantastic people, 15 of whom we had a tremendous opportunity to work with for a year. And also joined is our friend and comrade in this work, Dan Kolinski, and Dan is the regional director for Empire State Development. So let me step back and just give and paint what we did in the last year and a half. There were 15 community leaders that got together at the request of both the governor as well as the leadership at Micron to really put our pulse on if all boats were to rise and if we were to capture this moment the moment of great transformation, what are the priorities or what are the things we needed to lean into to ensure that we have full participation from end to end in this transformational moment? So as that being our edict, we worked alongside so many people, not only on this call, and I see so many of my friends and familiar faces, but we worked and did tremendous amount of outreach to get into listening mode. So we've talked or spoken with in different, using different ways of communicating, close to 13,000 people. And we did that via one-on-one meetings. We did that with small roundtables. We did that through town halls. We did that through small community groups. We did that through surveys. So we spent a fair amount of time doing the listening. And then we captured all of the data, and Tim is going to walk through what was the outcome of the data. But we focused on what did the community say it wanted or needed to ensure that we maximize this transformational moment. But some of the big themes that came out early on is our focus and our need to focus on communities that have either been vulnerable or underrepresented or not fully invested in, places where we needed to ensure there was alignment of goals, whether it's workforce development, childcare, transportation, and the like. And then after we did all of that data sorting, we came up with the community priorities. And so Tim will walk us through the community priorities document. And thematically, when we looked at this information, for us, the key values that we wanted to ensure were captured throughout the process was transparency, equity. How are we going to lean in on smart growth? And really, where was the conversation going to continue to be centered on throughout this discussion so that we ensured that community priorities lined up to the voice of those people we have spoken with? So with that being the framework, let me turn it over to my colleague and partner, I don't want to say in crime, partner in community, Tim Penix, who's also the vice president of the SUNY EOC organization. Tim?
Tim, you're on mute.
I knew I was going to do that. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having us here to discuss some of our work for this past year. And as many of you may have seen, and hope having read the document, you know, we really wanted to have priorities that guided how this impact would occur in Central New York, and having that community input was so valuable because it really is a document for this community, not just for the Micron effort, but for a number of other efforts that are happening now as we speak and will happen. And I always want to emphasize that sometimes we are thinking when we look at these documents or this work that we're looking for some type of immediate action to happen. And within 3 to 4 years, you know, we're done. No, this is a 20-year effort. So when we're talking about priorities, we're talking about, you know, immediacy, but also what will be occurring for the next 20 years. And for myself, and I guess I could speak for Mel and Dan, you know, it's impactful when you think that you're going to have impact for the next 20 years on a community that you've lived in and your children will be living in for those 20 years. So the priorities that were identified, and I also want to make one other comment, there were really no surprises. That was what was so interesting in that, you know, I think everyone would, when I read through them, will say, yeah, these are definitely areas that we need to be looking at for our community with Micron, or maybe not even with Micron, just efforts that we need to have impact in our community. Educational resources and access, workforce exposure, development and job opportunities, minority, women, veteran-owned business, small business development, community development and housing, quality of place, community health and family supports, and then a sustainable and equitable infrastructure development. Those were the 6 priority areas that were identified. In the process, as I said, this is a long, oh, I say long, it's 20 years. I guess I'm old enough to realize that's not that long anymore. But there are some immediate priorities that we need to look at to ensure that this impact is having the best impact and the most equitable impact. So we looked at those priorities and talked about strengthening STEAM literacy and social emotional support through K through 8 education, creating career readiness opportunities through 8 through 12, expanding workforce development programs. We know that we really need to ensure that we have an equitable economy in our community, in particular now as it's starting to really become, I think, a center of New York State. Supporting, again, minority women-owned businesses, enhancing diverse, sustainable housing initiatives, strengthening childcare and family supports. My day job, I am an educator that works with adult training, and it is imperative that we look at childcare and for how we resolve that for individuals entering the workforce, but even also for individuals that are going through training is just a significant effort. And it's not just centered on Central New York that we're having issues with childcare. So it definitely is a immediate priority. The document as you have in the priorities, they're guiding. Our hope and intent is to address as many as we can, but with understanding with 20 years, there will be changes. And if we're doing, and what comes about from the CIF has impact, there'll be other things that will be addressed in the future for this particular document. So it's a kind of a living document. On that note, I will transfer over to Dan Kolinski from ESD, and he will talk a little bit more about what's happening now after the document has been established.
Thanks, Tim. And I did just see the question that asked if there would be a link to the document. I know that Alicia will be following up with some information for you all that can include the link to both the CPD document, the community priorities document, and also there's a slide deck that we've been using for our workshops that we've been holding in the community for our what we're calling the Community Investment Fund workshops. We'll make sure that a copy of those are available as well, which will include links to the portal to access the Community Investment Fund. So real quick, the whole impetus of a lot of this work that we did came from the kind of first of its kind community benefits agreement that Micron went into agreement with New York State when the deal was signed. And I like to always stop and really commend Micron because they did something that was very unique in the private sector, where they knew that $100 billion investment is going to be disruptive to a community, both in some great ways. It's going to create great paying jobs. It's going to offer pathways to careers that otherwise would not be available to folks, but also in the sense that it was going to strain on our resources, a strain on our infrastructure, the need for new housing, the need for more services. And as a result of knowing that need and the Governor Hochul seeing kind of the foresight of what was going to be invested in this community to prepare for this moment, they agreed to a $500 million community investment fund. And this community priorities document is what is going to lead to how we make the investments, not only from that $500 million fund, but how the state continues to make investments in this region over the next 20 years to prepare us to meet the moment that Micron represents. And so of that $500 million, $250 million of it is committed from Micron directly. Another $100 million is committed from Empire State Development, which is the state's economic development agency. And then another $150 million will be found with our partner organizations and our philanthropic partners, both locally and across the country. And that'll be, again, a 20-year period for that $500 million to be deployed. That'll take place in a two-phased application. So if you are interested in accessing some of the funds for the Community Investment Fund, again, we'll make that portal available to everyone who's on this call. We'll make sure that you get the slides so that you have all this information, but that'll be a two-phased application process, with the first phase being a letter of intent. It's about 3 pages. It's going to ask some basic questions about your organization and what you do. But most importantly, and what you're going to have to do in that letter of intent is, going back to the community priorities document, identify which priority your investment is going to address and which specific goal under that priority you're going to address. And so that's the importance of these priorities, because again, it's serving as a blueprint for how the state and Micron makes investment in our region, hearing directly from the voices of the people who live here and work here and have been feeling the effects of some of these long-term issues for a while. Those priorities came directly from those conversations, as Mel talked about earlier. And so you'll need to point back to that document exactly which priority you're looking to address and which goal under that priority your project will address. So as I said, it's a 3-page letter of intent. I know a lot of people on this call are familiar with applying for state grants or have read through guidance before, and there's a lot of weediness. And I'd ask you right now, don't get lost in any of the weediness at this point, because there's the money's going to be, depending on, there's multiple tracks, whether Micron's going to fund it or the state's going to fund it, and it can mean different things. And we don't want you to lose sight of, if you have good ideas to address some of the most difficult issues that our region faces, childcare and housing and transportation, just to name a few of the many, those barriers to pathways, the barriers to workforce. If you have good ideas, we want you to submit letters of intent so that we can begin a conversation with ourselves, with our community members, and with Micron on how, if it's a good idea, we find a way to get it funded. So submit that letter of intent. There is, at this point, it's a rolling process. There is no deadline. For those of you really, really smart people on this call, and I know there's many of you who maybe did read the 9-page guidance, there is technically a deadline in that guidance that says January 31st. What I do, I'll let you know, that is more of an internal deadline so that we can reevaluate where we are after January 31st, make sure that the questions we're asking are the right questions, making sure that the process isn't confusing. And if we're hearing over and over again, people asking us the same question, or if we're hearing over and over again, or we're not getting quite the right responses, that'll give us an opportunity to adjust, make changes to the letter of intent, and then proceed forward. But there is really no deadline because this is a 20-year process, as Tim mentioned. If and when it's determined that your project is good and we like it and we want to have you move on, you'll be invited to fill out a phase 2 application that will be used through the consolidated funding application. I know many of you are familiar with the CFA. At least for ESD's projects, we'll be using the CFA. Micron might have its own separate portal that you would enter through. But so the phase 2 will be an invite-only application, and that you'll be asked to move on to. I'm gonna hold. I'm gonna kind of stop there. I want to make one last point. Is what we want this process to be different than other state processes. We want to ensure that the folks who come in with good ideas, there's going to be some folks who are just ineligible. You have to be in the 5 counties of central New York to be eligible for the funding. So that's Onondaga County and the 4 contiguous counties, which are Oswego, Madison, Cortland, and Cayuga. So you would need to be within those 5 counties to be eligible. And you do need to be touching on one of those 6 priorities to be eligible as well. So there are some things that could make you ineligible if you're not in one of those areas. But we want to ensure that if you're providing us good ideas, and for some reason, if you're not a good fit for the CIF, for the Community Investment Fund, we're providing you feedback that says, we want you to go talk to this organization who we think can help you build capacity, or there's grant dollars available in this organization that might be able to help you as well. We don't want to it's not just going to be a blanket no from us that, so sorry, you're not getting funding, good luck next time. We want to ensure that these ideas that you're taking the time to bring to light are acknowledged, and that if they are things that have the opportunity to change the trajectory of this region and help us address some of those key issues, that we're finding ways to help get them the support that they need, whether that's through additional grant dollars or technical assistance, especially when it comes to our not-for-profits, who we know have varying levels of capacity. And so we want to make sure that we're helping them meet this moment. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tim and Mel to see if there's anything that I missed. And I just want to also say, because they don't do this themselves, I want to commend Tim and Mel for their leadership. This was a, as Tim said, we were building the plane as we were flying it. This was a lot of work. They took a lot on their shoulders with a lot of unknowns in the mix, and they did just an extraordinary job. As you all know, they're extraordinary community leaders. We're lucky to have them. So I want to just say my thank you to both of them for being good friends, great colleagues, and great community leaders.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Dan, you didn't make the one last point. 500 million.
Your favorite, yes.
Right? Everyone is asking, it's a lot. It's a lot of money. $500 million, lots of money. But let us not be fooled. It is a deposit, right? We have so much work to do, and this is a deposit. And so, but we think this is a good springboard that will help either leverage or attract other commitments to this region. It will also help us as a community expand our reach to really get more and more interest here. But we all see this as a deposit, but it's a good one, but we see it as a deposit nonetheless.
No, Mel's exactly right. And if you need any proof of the truth of that statement, there are hundreds of millions of dollars being invested right now into this community outside of the CIF, the Community Investment Fund. You look at $200 million for On-Ramp, the program that's going to create 4 workforce hubs across upstate New York, with Syracuse being the flagship area for that workforce hub. Very exciting work. We're super excited. It's going to be built off the model in Buffalo that's called Northland. It's been very successful in Buffalo. We're gonna take some of the best practices from Northland and do that here. You know, they're talking about building a new off ramp of 81 right down to the Micron site. That's a $69 million investment from DOT. You talk about the workforce dollars that have been invested in this area, whether it's through programs like the Rosie's program with MACNY, training women to get into manufacturing, whether it's Syracuse Builds, as we're taking some of the residents of the city of Syracuse and getting them ready for constructions and trades work so they can not only build I-81, but then also build Micron. So there's a lot of dollars flowing into this region to help us meet this moment outside of the 500 million. And yes, by this time all is said and done, when 20 years has passed and Micron's got 4 fabs, and we're celebrating the completion of 9,000 jobs in this area, and 60,000 new residents plus, it's going to be significantly more than 500 million that ends up getting invested to help us meet this moment.
I just want to add, during this year, one of the things that became crystal clear in that, as Dan mentioned, all the extra or resources that are coming to our community. And, if you keep your eye on the news, just about every other week, there's some type of announcement happening that might be kind of related or semi-related, from tech hubs to, since Micron's first big announcement. One of the things that's unique is that with the reshoring of the semiconductor industry and the overall effort that's coming out of the Department of Commerce, there are these hubs that have been, I guess, established. And Micron being one that's in Syracuse, another one being, I think, Intel's in Columbus, Ohio. They're all over the country, put it like that. We're the only effort that actually established this kind of CEC, community engagement, with the attempts to ensure that we're going about it in an equitable fashion for the individuals in the community that we're serving. And with that, again, as we've been flying this plane, the eyes of the nation are on us. And when I say that all of these other established designated hubs coming through the Department of Commerce are looking at how we're approaching it, from a workforce standpoint, from an impact in community, housing, transportation, and where the CEC is kind of one effort in it, they're really looking to see how is this going to work. So it's a little added pressure than we initially thought, as we're talking about our community, that when we are successful, it will be a blueprint that potentially will be utilized across the country of how you can overcome inequity, how you will, establish these kind of massive economic opportunities and provide access for all. So we have a lot of people looking at us. All of you on this call are all a part of it. You're all a part of the success and providing information, helping us, make this work. So I just want to put that, so because people aren't really aware, we go to these meetings, in Washington and here, and they want to keep hearing about this committee. So what's going to happen with this? They're very detailed in their questions. So
let's move to some questions and Q&A. We had a number of questions submitted ahead of time, and former board member Brian Hoke, who will lead us off in and moderate some of the questions. Thank you, Brian, and thank you all.
Thanks, Rita, and thanks, Melanie, Tim, and Dan, for being here. Thanks to all of you who are joining us. As Rita said, we'll start with some questions we got in advance, but certainly, given the format we use today, if any of you all who are with us would like to ask a question live, we'll try to get to that. I'd ask that everybody remain muted. When you ask your question, be brief so we can give, and respectful, so we can give a chance to everybody else. First off, 500 million. That's 8 zeros with a 5 to the left of it. I've done a lot of these forums. Most of them don't involve figures of that size. So we had a number of questions, unsurprisingly, about how folks can get involved through organizations with which they work. Dan, you spent a fair bit of time in your remarks talking about that. But people ask questions like, how will we measure the impact, right? How can folks, as part of, say, a local community not-for-profit, keep abreast of changes as they develop? I wonder if we can, even though all of you sort of touched on this, if we could delve a little more deeply into, if there's more you can say about the process, especially as it goes on over time, right? I mean, it's pretty clear. You've done a nice job in the document sharing what is happening now. And you may not know yet what's going to happen, right? I mean, you'll know by looking back. But if you have thoughts about how this rolls out in subsequent years, love to hear anything you might have to say about that, please.
Yeah, I'll start quickly just with the impacts, and then I'll let Tim and Mel speak more to kind of the process and the long term and how we continue to listen to the voices of our community members. So within that letter of intent, and then more specifically in the phase 2, if you are to be awarded funding, you will have to describe the measures that you will and the data that you'll be keeping in order to meet certain metrics. So let's say, for example, you are working in workforce development. And you're saying, if you provide this funding, we're going to be able to, expand our workforce center. We'll be able to buy some machinery and equipment that allows us to train more technicians. And we're going to be able to train 50 technicians a year. So right there, that's your metric. And so what we will do is we will be following up to say, okay, the year is over. How many technicians did you train? And so we'll be able to keep that data in a way so that we're going to be able to look at kind of each individual impact, and they're going to fall under the certain buckets of funding, and we're going to follow up with people to ensure that they're meeting those goals. And if they're not, like, why? Is there something that we need to do to help to meet that goal? So those who do apply will have to specifically lay out what is the outcome of this investment, with the goal being that we're really having a large impact. And so you'll see, one of the things we talk about in our workshops is we want to see people coming together and collaborating. There are a lot of great organizations doing great work in this community. And maybe there's an opportunity because there's another organization doing similar work. Maybe it's in a different county. Or maybe it's in a different city, and maybe you can come together to collaborate at a high level. And so we're encouraging that level of collaboration. We're encouraging folks to maybe think outside of the box, and maybe there's someone who works adjacent to what you do, and together you're going to reach. And I apologize if you're hearing my little girl in the background. She's home with me today because daycare was closed. So I apologize if you hear that. So we want people to think differently. We want people to be able to demonstrate the impact that the investment that we're making is going to have, because ultimately we want the $500 million both to be leveraged and be more than 500 million. So at the end of the day, that 500 million we hope turns to a larger amount, and that the impact is helping as many people as possible access pathways to workforce, reducing barriers through childcare, transportation, housing, and getting them the skills that they need to have careers for the rest of their lives.
Cool. Tim, Melanie, do you all want to comment on this?
Echoing what Dan is saying, as we look at each particular application or successful awardee, I think as a community, and the reality is, some of us won't be in these roles when we start really measuring. We're talking 5 years, 10 years, who knows, 20 years, I won't be in this role, I believe that. But the idea of, has this community changed? Have we had impact that we expected from Micron or others that are coming? And have we maintained the status quo we've always had? Or have we had a significant impact where there's equity, there's, I could go through, people having jobs, healthcare, all these priorities. Have we moved the needle? So again, it'll be groups that'll come after us. We've set the framework. That's what this document is for. But when we look at how the total impact is, I think is going to be clearly aligned with these priorities that we have. They may not be priorities anymore. They may not be things that we need to work on. But so that's my thought on the impact.
And Tim, I'm sorry, when you say they may not be priorities, because not that they're dragons that are slayed, but problems that have been at least ameliorated. That's the
hope and intent. If not, then you're just creating things that you're going to be working for forever. And that's the whole goal. You know?
Cool. Thanks. Melanie, do you want to come in or should we?
You know what? I think my two colleagues have really answered the question of impact. And I guess finally impact is going to be obvious.
Got
If
it.
we're doing what we need to do, it will be obvious.
Got it. And as you all said, right? I mean, building the plane while you're flying it. It isn't every day that a project of this scope comes along, right? I mean, it's got to be just crazy, right? I mean, you all work to make things better, and one has the resources one has from different funding streams and different organizations. But I wonder, this is just from me. Could you talk about? I mean, did you get in there and say, I couldn't, I can't imagine 5 years ago being in the position where we're talking about $500 million. Was it just wake me up? I mean, I just wonder what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I believe, and this goes back, tell you, I've been doing this too long. I cannot keep track of the years. So I'll just name when Andrew Cuomo, we won the URI, Upstate. Was that what it's called, Dan?
Upstate Revitalization Initiative.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
it was 500 million at that time. But we went in with a formulated strategy. This is a event that's happening that we're formulating a strategy to solve or try to address. But then going back to what Melanie has said, this is just a down payment. And the 500 million becomes smaller when you start to hear billions of dollars being awarded throughout the country and even to Central New York. So yes, staggering. And the idea of, and again, I said this when we first made the announcement, lifelong resident of Central New York, and my family coming here, back in the 30s, actually the 20s, looking for opportunity. Those who lived here long enough know that many of our children and people have left for opportunity, right, that now they'll be returning and staying because there's going to be an abundance of opportunity. So I think that's been the biggest, I guess, impact for me, still absorbing, in that, this community is going to be changed forevermore, in a good way. And that's what we're hoping and planning for this to have. I don't know if I answered your question because you asked about the money, but
you did.
It's much bigger all of a sudden when you really realize, Central New York is forevermore changed.
Yeah, yeah. And Brian, I think to Tim's point, I think we're all approaching 500 million deposit. What is it going to leverage? What else is it going to bring in? Yeah, it's a big, big number. At first when we started down this track, it was micron, right? And then we started to pull back and we said, wait a minute. No, micron was an impetus for the conversation, but what's happened as a result of this moment, one, there was a tremendous amount of collaboration and great work going on, quite frankly, before Micron got here, right? What this helped enabled some of that work to do is to begin to think, wow, we can push things over the finish line because now there may be real opportunities for the funding that's necessary to drive and create impact. And that sense of we can, and that sense of there is really potentially light at the end of the rainbow, whatever the rainbow is and when, and that also shifted our mindset. I think we have started to move from a mindset of lack to a mindset of, wow, we can do this. It's hard, it's clunky, it's still messy. To do this work is hard. That takes a lot of cash and a lot of staying at the table, working in collaboration. But I feel what the money has done or the award has done, it's created a different mindset. where people are innovating in just even more explosive ways. And again, lots of work to do. I don't want to minimize anything. And I don't want to also minimize what's already been done, right? Because sometimes we get into the Micron moment and forget all of the good work that has been done, right? And the path that has been laid. Now we're just amplifying and enhancing and moving to the next level and pulling blinders off about significant, tough, thorny issues that we've had for decades and decades and decades. One, we're not being bashful about courageous conversations. We are looking at our warts head on. And I'm hearing conversation I haven't heard. And my corporate brothers and sisters are also, this is also their plan. You know, when people are talking about philanthropy and what you can lean into, well, here it is. There's a 90-page document. Have at it. Lots of work, lots of opportunity.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And very articulately said, so I appreciate that. If folks who are here as participants have questions, feel free to put some in the chat. We can have you ask it directly if you're comfortable doing so. I'll ask another one from those questions we had submitted in advance. Elizabeth asks about job readiness programs. I would assume, and I know none of you work at Micron nor control what they do and may not know, but certainly workforce development is a priority in this effort about which we're talking today. But Micron must have some of their own work. I wonder how, if you could share the difference between the funding you would expect to make to local organizations, be they public, private, or in between, and what Micron is doing itself. Is that something that's been discussed, or is that just, we're not sure what they're doing? Curious what you might have to say about that, please.
Well, I think there's a number of things that are happening that I can tell you that Micron is directly involved in. And what I mean is working in collaboration with local universities, workforce development organizations, ESD, and Dan already mentioned OnRamp, which clearly is going to play a major role in the workforce development in Central New York, let alone Micron, seeing that there are two leading priorities of development for workforce development is construction and semiconductor. Again, yet to be developed, but that is the goal of OnRamp at this point in time. But before that, when Micron first hit New York State, there were the initial discussions of workforce development, and as that has evolved, there are the Future Workforce Collaborative, Readiness Workforce Collaborative. Then there's also the collegiate, the universities collaboration of workforce development. Now, the difference is one is for degrees, 4-year degrees, then the other is for micro-credentials and associate certifications. As you all know, Micron, one of the major announcements was an investment in OCC in a clean room. So they hit the ground running a little bit. There's going to still be a number of evolutions to that. They stay committed to ensuring that it's done in an equitable manner and that populations across the region have access equally and with equity. So I think as that continues to evolve, which is going to be probably the most impactful from an economic standpoint, when you're seeing people making incomes that in a large numbers that historically haven't been for a while. I'm not sure if I answered that question directly, but
dead on. Yeah, exactly what I was hoping.
And if I can just add real quick, Brian, to that point, you know, this is truly going to be an all of the above approach because, as Tim says, you need a significant number of engineers. True. A significant portion of the jobs at Micron do not require a 4-year degree. Many folks in our community have some of those credentials already under their belt and simply will need to finish some sort of a certification program. And so Micron is working with, he said, the community colleges, with MACNY, with other organizations to get those processes in place. The goal is that it'll be streamlined, so people will be able to, you know, you'll reach out to your local workforce development organization, whether it's a Tim or someone else, and they'll be able to know who to put you in touch with to complete the training to then help you get one of those jobs. I think the other important thing I want to just touch on real quick, because you know, Micron was the impetus for this. but this is about a larger regional effort. There are thousands and thousands of good paying jobs in our region that are available today that are in manufacturing and other good sectors. And so what's great about the training that's going to happen is many people might want to go work for Micron, but they're going to get skills that'll be transferable in the industry across the region. And so we're excited because we're hearing a lot of angst from our legacy businesses about what's going to happen when we're competing. And I actually see it as an opportunity for everybody, because we're going to be attracting large numbers of people to our community. We're going to be training large numbers of folks who already live here, but otherwise didn't have a pathway to those jobs. And there's going to be lots of opportunity for them, whether it's directly at Micron, at one of the supply chains, or other businesses that are doing that work right here in Central New York.
Gotcha. Melanie, did you want to come in on this point? You good? Okay.
No, I'm good.
That was the point. That there is this large investment fund, but there's also lots of other stuff happening as part of just economics, right? But as part of Micron's investment outside of this fund. So that's great to hear. I see a question from Peter McCarthy, who has questions about the environmental impact. Peter, would you be willing to ask the question live?
Sure, here I am. I want to thank you all. Thank you all for your work on this. It's exciting and really important. In all the reading and articles and talk about Micron, I hear only a little bit about the environmental impacts. There are a lot of things that are hugely important: housing, jobs, transportation, many other things. But the environment, I think, is not getting much attention. The impacts in terms of water use, energy use, impact on wetlands, haven't been addressed very much in what I've seen so far. Seeing the architects' renderings of these many acres and of rooftops and parking lots, why aren't there solar collectors? We asked that question. They said, oh, well, they make the roofs leak. My 200-year-old house has solar collectors that supplies all my electricity, and the roof doesn't leak. I don't know how much this has to do with the fund, but I'd like someone to be addressing it much more. Thank you.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for the question. And again, to Peter's point, it may well be outside the purview of our panelists, but wonder if there's anything you'd care to say to that point.
I'll say one thing real fast, and it's that, you know, they're currently going through the environmental review process. So they're working both at the state level through the seeker process and at the federal level through the NEPA process, and they are literally creating tens of thousands of pages of reports to address the various needs. And so I don't want to speak on behalf of Micron because I don't work for Micron. But there will be lots more coming out once that draft EIS, that environmental impact statement, is released, which they're hoping. I'm sure you saw the article in Syracuse.com. They're hoping that will go to OSIDA later this year, sometime in December. There is what the article said. From there will then be a public comment period for 45 days in which feedback can be provided through that draft EIS. And then next year, the final environmental impact statement will be released to the state and to the federal government for final approval. So I think part of the reason why you're not hearing a ton of this is they're still doing the studies, and they still need to review those final impacts, but those will be coming out, and you will have a chance as the public to comment on those.
Cool. Thank you. Another question submitted in advance from Mohammed about how it is that local residents, particularly historically, economically, and socially underrepresented communities, are going to benefit from this huge investment. You've all, I think, in your remarks and answers to questions, touch on this. I wonder if we could delve just a little more deeply into how the framework, the priorities that you've put out, the discussions you've had, address that issue of ensuring that this tremendous windfall and its careful shepherding under your guidance and others can be assured to benefit all of us, perhaps the most needy among us. Wonder what else you might say in addition to what you've said already on that topic, please.
I think when I signed up, and I know I can speak on behalf of my co-chair, and I chances are I can speak on behalf of the 15 people who joined the committee, as well as the conversations that we've all had with both the state, the governor's team, and Micron, all agree that equity, transparency, engagement will ensure. And when we say equity, it has been such the cornerstone of everything we did, right? I would not have signed up if it did not include that. And for those of you who I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with for the past 30 years, understands that is at the heart of this, right? We have to get this part around equity right. Will we get it perfect? Absolutely not. But will we get it right? I think it really will continue to be what is the voice we're going to lean into? How do we just continue to be focused on what the goals and objectives are? Are we meeting them? Are we holding ourselves accountable as a community to deliver on them? But this has been the baseline for all of the work that we have been engaged in. We understand some of the historical impacts that have been and created the scenarios of disenfranchisement, underinvestment. And when I tell you everyone has brought this type of conversation to the process to ensure that we're leaning in, folks are leaning into this. And again, I'm going to say it's messy and it's hard and it's not easy. But again, I've heard conversation around these tables and leaning in a way I haven't heard since I've, for many decades.
That's great. Dan or Tim, do you all want to come in?
I would just echo and totally agreement with everything that my co-chair has said. 20 years, 15, 10, everyone on this call is going to have their ability to ensure that we stay the course and continue to provide this resource and support for these populations. It's written, it's the framework. All of you are going to be able to ensure as we move along that we're continuing to meet that objective. We don't all of a sudden get distracted. When I say we as a community, because this is a community document, and though we're the chairs and we have the 15 members, it's still a representation of the whole community. And it came forth that this is important. So I believe as Mr. Muhammad, you will be with us hand in hand as we move forward to ensure that we don't start to lose the mark, because that is critical for our community to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thanks. Dan, anything from your side, sir?
No, they said it great.
Well, thank you. I know we're getting close to time. I'll turn it back to you, Rita, but just thanks from me from this and in particular for your service to this effort.
Brian, just before you turn over, Rita, I did see the quick question about how if they would get the incentives without creating the jobs. I just want to make that very clear, because this is, I think, a misconception about economic development as a whole. All of ESD's incentives are reimbursable when the project is completed and when the jobs are created. So the dollars that the incentives that Micron has been given to come to New York State are only realized once the fabs are created and once the jobs are created, and that's in a reimbursable fashion. We obviously are making investments on the forefront, separate of the investments to Micron in workforce development and housing and childcare and the rest. Those are things that we should be investing in anyways outside of the Micron project because they're needed in our community. But for Micron itself, and it's similar with the federal dollars too, to access those dollars, they actually need to complete the project and hire the people that they said that they were going to hire.
Got it. Thank you. And thanks, Dan, for sharing that. I would point out that Alicia in the chat, early in the chat up high, put out a link to the community priorities document, which I'd encourage everybody to read. So thank you. Rita, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much, Melanie, Tim, and Dan. Very informative. I am thrilled. We have a lot of people here and who are able to hear this. I have also seen comments about wanting to watch it and have others watch it when we do post it online, which we will be doing. We will be posting this session online in the next couple of days, so it'll be available for others to see. And just so grateful for you guys to be here. Brian, as always, thank you so much for moderating the Q&A. What else can I tell you? As with all forums, as I said, it'll be posted. There's also on our website a convenient way to provide funds to Focus so that we can continue doing this good work. I'm very excited about what we've been able to do with Focus Forums. And we have a wonderful committee who is very good about planning these forums, and we're really getting top-notch people, including the people that you see here. So thank you everyone for being here. Enjoy this beautiful weather while it lasts, and have a wonderful weekend.